like the horror of Syria through the eyes of a child. With bombing all around her, 7-year-old Bana shares with us what it's like to live with the constant fear of serious injury and death. And the Prime Minister tells ITV News a political solution is impossible and the blame for the carnage lies with one man.
The atrocious violence that is being shown against civilians in Syria is at the hands of the Assad regime, and nobody should forget that.
Also tonight, hundreds more homegrown doctors, the plan for a more British health service.
This is Matthew! Pray for us!
Haiti's hurricane makes landfall, battering one of the poorest countries in the world.
And a hug from Harry for a truly inspirational child.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mark Austin and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Have you ever imagined what it must be like for a child to be trapped under constant bombardment in the Syrian city of Aleppo? Well, you don't have to imagine it any longer, because tonight 7-year-old Bana Al-Abed tells us exactly what it is like. She talks of her fears that at any moment her family will be destroyed, and she recounts how her best friend did die when her house was hit.
There is hope too. Bana prays that she'll be allowed to live long enough to realise her dream of becoming a teacher. She and her mother spoke to ITV News as part of our week-long series chronicling the desperate struggle for life in Aleppo under siege, as Emma Murphy reports.
What's life like when you're 7 years old and living on the front line of one of the world's most vicious wars? As Bana Al-Abed proves, the things that matter to little girls the world over still matter here in Aleppo, despite the ever-present danger. The games of childhood do still happen, but there is no innocence here anymore, as young lives are dreadfully marred by the actions of adults.
No, hear that.
I don't want to hear that, she says, and then winces as strike after strike rains down on Aleppo.
انقصفت اليوم امبارحة نزلت قنبلة نزلوا قنبلات كلياتهم.
The life children live in eastern Aleppo is one few people of any age can truly understand. Cut off from the world, Bana and her mother have been tweeting about their experiences. They are tiny glimpses as to how war affects a child. In 140 characters, Bana writes of people dying like flies, of fearing what will follow as the bombs fall like rain. She tells of how much she misses her dead friend, killed in an airstrike on her home. And night after night has one plea. Stop the bombing now. I want to sleep. I'm tired. It's little wonder she and her brothers seem amazed to see a new dawn.
Mona from Aleppo, we are still alive.
There's no school anymore, yet Bana has a vocabulary of a much older child. The reality of life has taught her words that no parent would wish their child to speak.
طائرات طيارات والقذائف والارتجاجيات هدول بموتونا بدهم يموتونا.
Bana's family have faced accusations of propaganda, but say this is their attempt to tell the world of Aleppo's horror and make people understand that children like these are being killed and maimed every day.
نحن أطفال نستحق العيش. نحن لسنا إرهابيين. نريد العالم أن يسمعنا.
7-year-old Bana Al-Abed ending that report there. And it is children and civilians like Bana who are bearing the brunt of the daily bombings in Aleppo. The latest figures obtained by ITV News do show that. Over the weekend, there were 37 airstrikes on the rebel-held part of the city. 9 people were killed, most of them civilians.
Not included in that number is 4-year-old Eman, who we told you about last night. We showed her being treated in hospital after she'd been injured playing with an unexploded cluster bomb. Sadly, last night, she lost her fight for life. And as those innocent children continue to die, Syria's ambassador to the United Nations remained defiant today. Bashar Jafari told our correspondent Robert Moore in New York that it's the Syrian government's duty to take every inch of Aleppo, and claimed they were victims too.
France is bombing many civilian targets in Aleppo and in Idlib. The same thing applies to the British, who are helping and backing the terrorists in the same areas.
Is there a military solution to Aleppo? Is the Syrian army simply going to try and seize the whole city? You know,
this is our duty, my friend. Our duty, our constitutional rights is to get back every single inch of our territory from these terrorists. The solution for the Syrian crisis is political. The Syrian crisis, I'm not talking about Aleppo.
Here, the Prime Minister told ITV News today that any political solution to the war was now impossible. Theresa May described the violence in Aleppo as atrocious and heartbreaking and could offer little hope of a quick end to the fighting. She spoke to our political editor, Robert Peston.
Hello, Robert. Good to see you.
A few minutes with our new Prime Minister to discuss a tragedy not directly of our making, perhaps, but from which we surely can't walk away. ITV have been running a series all week about the bombing of Aleppo, the tragedy of what's going on in Syria. Last week alone, 100 children, almost 100 children killed.
I think it's absolutely heartbreaking, some of the scenes that we are seeing taking place in Syria, the levels of violence we're seeing, the way in which the Syrian regime is indiscriminately bombing its own civilians, and their policy of starve or surrender. I'm afraid that seems to make a political solution at the moment impossible. I mean, we continue to raise our voice along with others in the international community to urge all parties to allow humanitarian access to those who are in need.
The French have been arguing for a ceasefire, bringing a resolution to the Security Council. Will we support that?
We will, of course, look at the proposals that the French have put forward in the Security Council. But I think it is, so far, of course, there's been international pressure that hasn't been responded to, and the levels of violence that we see are absolutely appalling.
How can we put more pressure on Russia and via Russia on Assad?
It's for the international community to continue to put pressure on Russia. What is absolutely crucial is for people, I think, just to look at the desperation of the lives of people in Aleppo and other parts of Syria, at the fact that Assad is indiscriminately bombing his own civilians.
What is our responsibility? Many do say that the Syria crisis stems in part from our intervention in Iraq. Do we have more than a moral responsibility here?
What is happening in Syria, the atrocious violence that is being shown against civilians in Syria, is at the hands of the Assad regime, and nobody should forget that. We have acted to help refugees coming out from Syria. We're the second biggest bilateral donor in the world, but we need a political solution, a political long-term solution which sees a Syria without Assad.
Now, one of your senior colleagues was fantastically pessimistic about Syria, said this could go on for years and years and years.
Russia has to accept that we need that humanitarian aid to get through to Aleppo. We need humanitarian aid to be getting through to those who are in such absolutely desperate need in Syria. And we need a political transition to a Syria without Assad.
Prime Minister, many thanks.
Thank you.
Our political editor there, Robert Peston, speaking to the Prime Minister, Theresa May. And there is much more on our website, including Robert's blog on the challenges facing the UK over Aleppo.
Here, the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has unveiled plans to train an extra 1,500 doctors a year in England to stem an NHS staffing crisis.
He wants to cut the reliance on foreign staff and tie trainees to a 4-year contract to stop them leaving abroad as soon as they've qualified. Our health editor, Rachel Younger, examines the proposals.
Hello, Mr. Boland. How are you doing?
Surgeon Darren Subar qualified in the West Indies, but has worked in the NHS for almost 2 decades. Here at the Royal Blackburn, 1 in 3 doctors comes from overseas, and the hospital believes it's richer for it.
The best of the best is the best of the best, and it doesn't matter whether that comes from UK-bred doctors or international doctors. What you want is the best doctors to come here to work, to provide patients with the best service that we can provide.
I think with smoking, isn't it, like 20%, I seem to want to say.
But just down the road at Manchester University, this is the generation who will follow him into the NHS. And the government wants to see more like them being trained at home. So by 2018, it plans to increase the intake of student doctors from 6,000 to 7,500 in England each year. It will cost £100 million in the first 2 years alone, but should make NHS England less reliant on doctors from overseas, who nationally make up a quarter of the workforce. The Health Secretary using his Tory conference speech to praise the contribution of those doctors, but launch plans for a self-sufficient NHS.
When it comes to those that are EU nationals, we've been clear we want them to be able to stay post-Brexit. But looking forward, is it right to carry on importing doctors from poorer countries that need them, whilst we turn away bright home graduates desperate to study medicine?
There is no doubt the NHS desperately needs more doctors. Here at the Royal Blackburn, it can be a real struggle to find enough of them to safely staff some departments. Each homegrown new recruit costs over £200,000 to train. To ensure value for money, the government will now insist on a minimum 4-year commitment to the NHS.
Would you have signed up for this?
I would have, but I'm not sure whether I would have in the UK, because there's lots of different places you can train.
If the government builds strong relationships with the doctors, that will keep people into working for the NHS longer than having some sort of ban for 4 years.
And whether or not it's the right way to hang on to our doctors, it is at least a real commitment to make sure the NHS has more of them. Rachel Younger, ITV News, Blackburn.
Well, the Home Secretary, meanwhile, has announced a crackdown on foreign workers, suggesting there should be tough new rules to protect jobs for British people. Amber Rudd also wants to look at tightening the rules for foreign university students. Our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp, is at the Conservative Party conference. Chris, this sounds like a tougher line, is it?
Yes, Mary, it is a bit of a tougher line. But you know what? I thought today was the day that the rhetoric on immigration sort of it clashed with the reality of the impact that fewer migrants might have in certain areas of the economy. Now, look, you don't have to have your ear too close to the ground around here to hear the word immigration. It's mentioned on the stage, on the fringes, in all the interviews that we do. And that's because the government's taken from the EU referendum that British voters want more control of our borders and more control of migrants. So today, Amber Rudd announced two things. Firstly, on international students, she said there should be fewer overseas students studying at British universities. And secondly, as you're about to hear, she thinks British firms should have to jump through more hoops if they want to employ an overseas worker rather than a British one.
We will be looking across work and study routes. This will include examining whether we should tighten the test companies have to take before recruiting from abroad. The test should ensure people coming here are filling gaps in the labour market, not taking jobs that British people could do.
Now, as soon as she said that, employers groups and groups which represent agency workers said that will immediately affect firms' ability to expand and recruit the people they need. And then universities said that these students shouldn't be included in immigration numbers because they bring £7 billion into the economy. Theresa May repeatedly clashed on this issue when she was Home Secretary. She wanted to cut student numbers. She's the Prime Minister now. She looks like she wants to get her own way.
OK, Chris Shipp, thank you.
The pound fell to its lowest level against the dollar for 31 years today as Brexit continued to affect the currency markets. By contrast, though, the FTSE index of the leading 100 companies came within a whisker of setting a new record high. Our business editor, Joel Hills, is in central London tonight. Joel, different markets, different stories. Is this good or bad news?
Well, look, Mark, share prices in London hit briefly record highs, but it's not necessarily a sign that the British economy is in rude health. Many of the companies listed in the city behind me are global in their reach. No, a strong economy has a strong currency, and the pound weakened yet again today. Investors seem to take a very dim view of our future prospects. Now, that said, all the evidence is that since the referendum, our economy's actually performed rather well, better than rather well, in fact. So they may be overdoing the gloom. Let's look at what the IMF IMF said back in May. It warned that if we voted to leave the EU, that actually the consequences would be pretty bad. Today, the IMF said not only will we avoid a recession, but actually that growth here in Britain is going to be stronger than that of many of the advanced economies. I think some of the political speeches we've heard in Birmingham haven't helped with the pound. It's very clear that although there's a commitment to free trade, the priority seems to be curtailing free movement of labour, and that has the markets worried.
OK, Joel, thank you very much.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, 145-mile-an-hour winds hit Haiti as Hurricane Matthew sweeps in.
And when Ollie met Harry, the Prince recognises the bravery of children at the Well Child Awards. Those stories and more, right after the break.
Hello and welcome back. Hurricane Matthew has made landfall on the Caribbean island of Haiti, bringing with it 145-mile-an-hour winds, torrential rain and massive waves. The storm is threatening to devastate towns and villages that are still struggling to recover from the 2010 earthquake there. Rebecca Barry has the latest.
This is Matthew! Pray! Pray for us!
Pray for us, he screams, as Hurricane Matthew hits western Haiti. With winds of 145 miles an hour, this is the strongest storm to hit the Caribbean in almost a decade. And Haiti, one of the world's poorest countries, has so far taken the brunt, with homes destroyed and streets left underwater. Families here are still recovering from the devastating earthquake 6 years ago, left with little protection from the wind and rain. These images from the International Space Station show Hurricane Matthew's devastating path, the spinning storm clouds heading north and potentially towards the east coast of the United States. In Cuba, the winds have whipped up powerful waves. Last night was terrible, says this woman. The waves were enormous. I thought they were going to come into the house. Some homes have already been turned to rubble. The full extent of the damage is still unknown, but once again, it will be those with the least who are hardest hit. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
Here, the man accused of murdering Labour MP Joe Cox refused to speak when he was asked to enter pleas at the Old Bailey today.
Thomas Mayer, who's 53, had not guilty pleas entered on his behalf. He allegedly shot and stabbed the MP outside her constituency surgery in June.
The footballer Ched Evans was back on trial today, accused of raping a woman in a hotel room who was too drunk to consent. Evans was previously found guilty, but later had his conviction quashed by the Court of Appeal. He denies the charges. Rupert Evelyn was in court.
4.5 years after he was found guilty of rape, Ched Evans is back in court. A retrial for the footballer who successfully appealed against his conviction, but still finds himself in the dock, accused of the same crime. Evans currently plays for Chesterfield, but he's also put on a shirt for Manchester City, Norwich, Wales, and at the time of this alleged crime he was with Sheffield United. Given his high profile, the jury were warned by the judge, please do not go anywhere near the internet or social media and do your own research. This case has a history. There has been publicity in respect of the previous legal proceedings. You are to try this case on the evidence you hear in this court, in this trial, and nothing else. Prosecution lawyer Simon Medland said to the jury, you may feel many of you will know this defendant. He was, at the time, and remains, a well-known footballer. He asked them to put aside any preconceptions they may have about rape and ignore the views of anyone else and concentrate instead on an objective assessment of the evidence. The jury heard the prosecution cases that Evans had sex without consent with a 19-year-old girl in a hotel room in Rhyl, North Wales in 2011. They were told his co-defendant at the original trial was acquitted and that Evans denies the charge against him. Tomorrow they will hear in person evidence from the woman he is accused of raping. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Cardiff.
Maria Sharapova says she can't wait to return to the tennis court in April after her doping ban was reduced to 15 months on appeal. The five-time Grand Slam champion was initially banned for 2 years after testing positive for a recently banned drug called meldonium at the 2016 Australian Open.
And finally tonight, the heartwarming hug for Prince Harry from a very special little boy. 5-year-old Ollie Carroll has incurable Batten's disease, which will eventually stop his muscles working.
But when Ollie saw Harry at the World Child Awards for Inspirational Children, nothing was going to stop him saying thank you, as Richard Pallow explains.
At the age of 5, Ollie Carroll can no longer stand or walk by himself. But the warm welcome of another can sometimes help him summon up the strength. A hug from Prince Harry, his reward.
Will you cuddle everybody? Not everybody. I'm not everybody's faces like on the other side.
For his mother Lucy, a moment to remember and to now reflect on how he'd been instinctively drawn to the young royal.
I'm guessing most 5-year-olds don't really understand who Prince Harry is, and unfortunately with Ollie's brain condition, he won't know who he is. So yeah, I do think he's just got a feeling from him that just made him think, oh, Prince Harry needs a cuddle.
Ollie had been a happy, healthy 2-year-old before starting to lose his speech and then mobility. The diagnosis was Batten's disease, a rare illness with no cure and a life expectancy of just a few years.
Even though he's in so much pain and everything he goes through, you know, he has seizures every day, he's struggling to eat, he's always wearing a smile, and he's always trying to do his high fives and his thumbs up, which he's completely famous for. Thank you, Ollie.
And from that new friend of Ollie's last night, a prize for being such an inspiration to both people and princes alike. Richard Pallow, ITV News.
5-year-old Ollie Carroll. Yeah. Wonderful. That's it. Tom Bradby's here with news at 10.
But from all of us, have a very good evening. Bye-bye.